Right after I graduated, I started the Muslim International Film Festival. Canadian Muslims are not going anywhere in Canada, and we need to be reported on factually and accurately. I was being attacked to the point that if anybody even commented on my Facebook post, they were getting DMs about me, asking where I am, if they could speak to me.
I am genuinely embarrassed that I did not know about the existence of MIFF until this year, and I'd love to figure out a way of blaming you for it, but I can't.
It's about the way you say things when it comes to PR, and it's about being very transparent and honest with what you're saying. I was just really recognizing the oppression that existed from a government, and a government is not a religious entity.
I feel like MIFF has done a pretty good job of establishing itself as a platform for underrepresented voices.
And we also have an additional category that is different than you'll see from any other film festival is Muslim excellence. It's important to have diverse voices and marginalized communities represented on screen. However, it's more important to do them correctly.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم إني أسألك علما نافعا وقلبا خاشعا وعملا متقبلا اللهم بارك لنا في هذه المجلس واجعله سببا للخير والهداية آمين. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. O Allah, we ask you for knowledge that benefits, a heart that is humble, and actions that are accepted by you. Guide our words, our intentions, and our reflections, so they may bring benefit and unity to all who listen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone to another episode of You Tell Me, a Canadian Muslim podcast. I'm your host, Khurram Rashid, and as always, I'm thrilled to have you with us today. In this episode, inshallah, we're taking a deep dive into the world of filmmaking and storytelling with a truly inspiring guest. I'll tell you more about her in just a minute, but I am really excited and really looking forward to speaking with her. We'll explore the power of film as a medium to build community, the unique challenges faced by independent filmmakers and barriers in film education, and paths to a career in storytelling. I'm thinking we'll just do one episode and solve all the problems, one shot, one and done, make everybody's life easy. So whether you are a film enthusiast, an inspiring storyteller, or simply curious about the magic behind the screen, inshallah, this episode will leave you inspired and informed. Our guest today is, in my opinion, my very personal, very humble opinion, a dynamic force to be reckoned with when it comes to the world of filmmaking and storytelling. Hirra Farooqi is the founder and director of the Muslim International Film Festival, better known as MIFF, an organization dedicated to championing diversity on screen and amplifying untold narratives, celebrating Muslim excellence in film. A graduate of Toronto Metropolitan University with a Bachelor of Journalism, better known as TMU for some of us, less younger folk. Hirra transitioned into documentary filmmaking, contributing to impactful projects like The Secret Marathon, The Broken Courage. As a producer, her work includes a music video called Sahiban and short films such as Salacia, Kya Poem, and One Day, each highlighting important topics and uplifting marginalized voices. Hirra, let me say this with sincerity and honesty. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Welcome to You Tell Me.
Thank you so much. No, Jazakallah. It's such an honor to be here. You made me sound so much better. So thank you very much. It's very humbling, but no, I really, really do appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here. So now that you've already complimented my introduction and I'm done regurgitating your IMDb page, I'm really curious. I'm really interested to find out a little bit about you in your own words. Who is Hirra Farooqi?
Hirra Farooqi? Well, that's a good way to put it.
I want some internal analysis,
Oh, no, we're going to psychoanalyze me today. I would say, I think I am the type of person that just likes to kind of get involved in a lot of things. So I'm a woman of many hats. I don't know if I should say fortunately or unfortunately, but I am Afghan and Pakistani. My parents are both ethnically Afghan. I was raised in Pakistan and Peshawar, and that's a huge part of my identity. And I was raised here in Canada as well. So I did my bachelor's in journalism here at TMU. And after I did my bachelor's in journalism, I kind of realized this gap, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, but this gap in the filmmaking community. And right after I graduated, I started the Muslim International Film Festival, which I think takes a lot of my identity lately. It's being, part of MIFF and being able to create a platform like MIFF. And then, of course, after my second or first year of MIFF, I also realized that I wanted to get into filmmaking myself. So for the last couple of years, I started in documentary journalism and documentary film as a production assistant. And then I decided to move up in narrative film through a music video. Then after that, I decided to hop onto a couple of narrative short films as a producer. So all in all, I would say I am the founder and director of MIFF, as well as a producer. And I just really like to champion under-marginalized communities and voices, specifically for my community as well. And yeah, that's really who I am, I guess.
Amazing. I mean, born and raised in Canada, or have you spent any time in Afghanistan and or Pakistan?
I was born in Afghanistan, but I was very young when I moved here. So I was about 2 months old when I moved here with my family. But we moved back to Pakistan in 2004, and we stayed there until 2010. So I spent a good chunk of my years, adolescence years, in Pakistan.
Okay, and spent any time within like the entertainment industry in Pakistan as well?
So later on, not during those years, but later on, Sulaysha was actually shot in Pakistan, and Sahiba is also a Pakistani music video that we shot in Pakistan as well. So I think my earliest years of film and narrative film was done in Pakistan, and I was involved I'm also an event planner a lot of the time. So I did some event planning for the Hum TV Awards when they were here. So involved in the Pakistani entertainment industry to a certain extent, and the Pakistani film industry, but very much now focusing on bringing those voices, Pakistani, Afghan, and Muslim voices here in Canada.
Okay. So the next time the Hum TV Awards comes to Toronto, I can contact you down low for tickets.
Maybe. I have to find my plug. I don't know where my plug is anymore.
Awesome. So if from your own personal choices, do you prefer more Western pieces of entertainment? I'd love to find out what your favorite film is officially.
Oh, favorite film is such a hard. Okay.
I know.
I would say I'm definitely more inclined to Bollywood.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say they're my favorite films. However, yeah, there are definitely some films that I would consider my favorite. I think an independent film, though, my all-time favorite at the moment, I would say, was for the longest time Joyland. That was created as an independent film coming from Pakistan. It was out maybe 2-3 years ago. That was definitely one of my favorite films in terms of production, storyboarding, screenwriting, everything. Now, more recently, I would say American Fiction has become one of my favorite films of all time, just because of I think that the whole, I'm really into, more recently, I'm more into kind of comedic writing as well, and script writing, and I think that was captured really well throughout the film, as well as showing the realities of it all. So yeah, I think those are my favorite films right now at the moment.
Well, that's quite the range, though. I really like it. I tend to generally like the relatively older stuff. So more recently, there was a show made in the early 2010s, 10, 11, 12, something along those lines. My family thinks that they pay me commission royalties for talking about it as much as I do. I don't know if you would have heard of the show called The Newsroom with Jeff Daniels.
I've heard of it. I haven't watched it.
Only 3 seasons, all about journalism and media and ethics and integrity in journalism. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know how people, when they want to quote and sound intelligent, they quote Shakespeare?
Yeah.
Right? The example that comes to my mind, even in that movie, Good Will Hunting, where Robin Williams made that epic speech, he's talking about war, right? And he's talking about, once more into the breach, dear friends. And that in my house, if we want to sound intelligent, we quote The Newsroom.
The Newsroom. Okay, good to know. If I ever come in for chai, that is all I'm going to be quoting.
Oh, you're more than welcome anytime. So I was actually really curious when I saw through all of your intro and whatever, you went to TMU. I'm really curious on the choice of going to TMU. I grew up in Mississauga, so let's call a spade a spade. All my best friends are UTM snobs.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious about why TMU.
Of course. So I definitely like my parents definitely did not want me to go into journalism. I was a very bright student in terms of like science and math. I was really good at it, but I hated it. I hated it with my whole soul. And because of that, my father definitely thought I was going to be the golden like dentist or doctor. And
Right.
he wanted me to apply to like UFT, which I did, but I didn't tell him that I applied to UFT's journalism school. TMU actually does have the best journalism school in all of Canada. So when I did get into TMU, I also got into UFT. I got into like Western and a couple of other schools as well. In the UK, TMU has a better program, but UFT is a better school. So my parents definitely wanted me to go to UFT. And I just like, when they weren't looking, I accepted my offer to TMU. And the main reason is because it is the best journalism school in all of Canada. I think for me, it was just a no-brainer, especially when I did get a call from our chair as well, who was like kind of convincing me to take the offer. I still remember the day I got my admission. I had to go to TMU. So I've been
Right.
able to really just build my career off of what I've gotten. Yeah, I'm not a journalism student anymore. I'm not a journalist anymore, but alhamdulillah for the skills that I was able to take from there.
Right. No, that's absolutely amazing. Since you spoke about going to TMU for journalism, I'm curious, when it comes to pursuing a career in whether it be film or in journalism, what are some of the common misconceptions that people may have or people do have, especially within the Muslim and immigrant community?
So I do come from a very conservative background, and I think we were also just we lived most at that point we had lived most of our lives in Pakistan. So I think we were still trying to adjust from like the sort of lifestyle that we had in Pakistan to Canada. And I think what I understood was that just being especially I was a hijabi at the time as well when I was in university and I was pursuing journalism, and I think it was the conception of being on screen as a filmmaker, as a journalist, being on screen, especially when you do like quite honestly, like even like I didn't understand it back then, but now I guess I'm older and I understand my family's perspective so much more. Is being on screen is putting yourself in a vulnerable position,
Right.
whether it's as a journalist or a filmmaker or an actor. And I guess our parents do fear for that sort of like vulnerability to be showcased on screen, because of whatever reputation they have built us. I think I've also understood that now, alhamdulillah, I've built my own reputation. But I mean, back then, my reputation was my family. Like it was, especially being from a Pakistani Afghan household, it was basically my last name was what I was referred to or what I was known as to other family members. And of course, there's like this whole like notion of what will people say. We all have this conception of what goes on. Maybe not so much the journalism community, but the film community of like what goes on in the industry. We hear all
Right.
these like rumors. We hear all these things that we're like very much balancing what your Islamic beliefs are and what is allowed and what is not allowed in the film industry. So I think it's very valid. I think even for me now that I've grown up, if I had a child who wanted to pursue film, I would keep an extra eye on them just to make sure that they're not compromising their beliefs and everything like that too. So there are those misconceptions, but I think it's very much about your core beliefs. If your core beliefs are intact, whether it's in journalism or in film, there's no question of whether you're going to. Of course, you're going to come across like the dilemma of whether you want to compromise something, but there's no question that it actually will be if you have your core beliefs intact. And I guess those are the main misconceptions that I had to deal with in the Muslim community. But outside of it, as a Muslim myself, I think, especially in journalism school, I think I was one of 3 Muslims in the entire program. It's a program of 140 people. There's probably 5 or 6 people of color in the entire program. This was 2015 to 2019. So it was the years of rampage, and it still is like in terms of like journalists always reporting on Islamophobic beliefs, like or like reporting or promoting Islamophobic beliefs. So I remember even as a student in my first year, one of the first things that they do, which is like, I think TMU does really well. It's very hands-on. Your first day, you have 6-hour labs, and on your first day, they just throw you out there and tell you to go write an article. And of course, like first year, you're like, I have all this anxiety, and I was like more comfortable speaking to my own community. And I remember like going to like the MSA or like even just speaking to Muslim students on campus. And I know, and I don't blame them for this, but I know how nervous they were speaking to any journalism students or just journalists in general, because and I found this a lot in the Muslim community, because they don't know if the story is going to be edited in the wrong way. They don't know if this is whatever they say is going to be taken into a Islamophobic trope, another Islamophobic trope. So I think that fear was very valid, but that was an extra layer as a journalism student, as a Muslim journalism student, that I had to work on to ensure that my community trusts me. And then even like people who are not from my community, this is going into another tangent, but
go for it.
In journalism, we're taught not to have opinions. Like that's literally what we're taught in school. We're not allowed to tweet our opinions. We're not allowed to speak on our opinions. We have to be completely unbiased. However, this is a disadvantage for people of color, because when you're Black, they will automatically assume that you support Black Lives Matter. And if you're a Muslim, they will automatically assume that you are going to you're going to have a biased view on Islam or Islamophobic sort of attacks. And your opinion is already formed by people in the newsroom. The editor will assume, they will not give you, instead, like let's say there's a story about Islamophobia, they will not give that story to a Muslim reporter because they don't want the reporter to be biased. So this is like a whole conversation that is actually happening a lot more recently in the journalism community. But back then, that was the main thing that I had to deal with. And that was like one of me and like maybe like the other 5 people of color in the program were constantly arguing about. Because we were like, we are the right people to actually tell these stories, not our white peers.
Because typically when the story comes out from that side, then it's biased in the opposite direction.
Exactly.
More often than not. That's what we see anyway.
Exactly. And it's so much more easier for white folks to not be opinionated on racism, because it doesn't affect them. Racism doesn't affect them to the way it does affect us. So I think that was one of my main things. And I think one of the things that kind of put me off a little bit from journalism, because I realized that as an institutional, and like in the school at least, I felt like as an institutional sort of way it's taught, at least here in North America, I felt like it was taught with the white gaze, and with like colonial concepts as well, which is what was really difficult for me to kind of come around. Because for me, like outside of journalism, the main reason I went into journalism was to report on my people, to be able to tell these right stories, and not having that barrier over there. And where I thought that I was going to go into there, I was going to be one of the few Afghan women, one of the few Muslim women to be able to report.
And everybody's going to be like, oh, we finally have an Afghan and a Muslim.
Exactly.
All the stories. And that just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But that brings me to a whole other question, because we're talking about in our community nowadays quite a bit about how, and it's one of my rants all the time, is that we need to encourage our children to go into fields like journalism and get a formal education in that field. So when we report on our own stories, we are capable. We have the training to be able to do that effectively. And then we also have credibility, where someone will listen to us because they believe we've got the right background. So, however, what you're saying is, well, if and when we succeed and they end up going to those schools, it may still not bring about the results that we're hoping that it will. So how do we circle that square, I guess, is my question.
So I don't think it's impossible. And I don't think that, I think if there's more, like, again, like it was just me and one other Muslim student. There was 3 of us, but it was just me and one other Muslim student that was speaking up about this, right? Or trying to get that sort of like recognition of what is right and what is wrong. And I think if it's in the masses, it makes a huge difference, because in their perspective, they're also looking at me and this one other student. They're like, oh, they just want to cause trouble. You know what I mean? Like that's just what it is. And if we do encourage our kids to be able to go into these fields, then we're producing like bulk of like students who are going to be able there and be able to do the same thing. However, it will take some time, because I know Muslims who are in the last year, especially in the last 2 years since October 7th, I've known so many journalists who have just left journalism because it's so hard to be in the inside and do a change when there's so little of us. It's
Okay.
definitely, I think it's definitely possible, but I think it needs to be it's a lot of groundwork. And I think anybody
Right.
who goes into the field, they kind of have to recognize and know that there's barriers to journalism in general if you are a journalist, but there are multiple more barriers as a person of color and as a Muslim that
Right.
exist
Okay.
because of the system, the way the system is set up, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me drill down a little bit more into that. How crucial do you think is a formal education when it comes to journalism or even in film compared to hands-on experience or self-taught skills? So when we talk about that, we want to encourage our children to go into journalism or film school to get that formal education. How crucial is it really? Or can you take YouTube lessons or LinkedIn Learning and just kind of learn it on your own?
Yeah, so I will say, I think formal education for journalism is absolutely needed. I think it's absolutely needed. I will say that because there are so many different legal things that you learn through the formal education of journalism. Like journalism is actual live reporting on factual issues, whereas filmmaking, it could be fiction as well, right? So for journalism, I would say 100%. If you're trying to be a journalist, go to journalism school. There are so many things that you need to learn and you will learn. And I don't think you can do it without that sort of certification. With film, I think I didn't go to film school. I mean, I did go to journalism school, which I did learn the hands-on experience of how to use a camera, but I'm not the one using the camera. I'm not, no, there's no way I'm a professional cinematographer, not even close. But I think it is helpful to go to film school. I don't want to bar film school entirely because I personally do feel like if I knew that I wanted to do film and I went into film school, I'd be in a much better place. I think it's a great privilege to be in film school, but it's not needed.
That's really cool. So we now know if someone wants to become a journalist, it's very important for them to go to good journalism school and go through that path. And we know we need more people that need to go into that field. And we also know that when you do go, you're not always going to get the results that you're looking for, and it'll be very difficult to navigate your time while in that environment. So how do we bring those two things together? What support do our next generation require to be able to navigate those challenges? And are there any initiatives in place already that we may not be aware of that could possibly provide that support?
I haven't been in the journalism space for a couple of years now, but I know that
Mhm.
there are groups now in Toronto specifically that journalists are coming together, especially like I've seen a couple of journalist groups that had emerged together. Like I think there's a group called Journalists for Palestine, I believe, that are doing sort of like I don't know if that's what they're actually called, but I know that I saw something that where journalists had come together, some of the top journalists in global news, CBC, had come together to speak up on these sort of things. So, and call out the spaces. I think your most important thing is to have allies, and not just allies that are people of color, but even allies that are in positions of power and are white. It's important to have those sort of allies who are being actually listened to in those spaces, who will advocate for you just as much as you're advocating for yourself. When you're in school as a student, I would say that there is your course union. And I believe, at least at TMU, I don't know if they still have this position, but a friend of mine was advocating for this position at TMU, an old friend of mine. And she had created the position of equity and inclusion in the course union to ensure that these sort of issues are being accounted for. I'm not sure if that's still a thing at TMU or any other school, but I know that during my years at TMU and just generally during my years of school, I know those positions were being added everywhere, not
Right.
just in the course union, but in our MSA. It was being added in our um, student unions. And I know those positions were emerging, and I think they still are out there from what I know. And being involved in those positions is what actually I think brings change. I think people don't understand how much change actually comes in from institutional universities and students that actually end up following through to actual workplaces. So I think that's what I would say. I wouldn't ever encourage anybody to give up. I think for me, it's just film ended up working a lot more easily, and I ended up going through something a little bit traumatic, but a little bit and during my years of school at TMU, about specifically between Israel and the Israel-Palestine situation, which is why I stepped away from journalism. And I think a lot of people have, but I think it's not worth giving up for because at the end of the day, Canadian Muslims are not going anywhere in Canada, and we need to be reported on factually and accurately. And I think it's on us to be able to do that or call it out at least.
That's absolutely amazing. I want to definitely ask about if you're open to sharing the
Yes.
challenge that you face when it comes to. Before I move on to that, though, I just want to say for any students out there that may be considering, education journalism, or you are in that program, if you are struggling, um, you know, Hirra's personal email address is on screen right here. No,
Yeah.
I'm kidding. I'm not going to share.
It's
I'm not going
fine.
to share it. I
It's
promise.
totally
But yeah,
okay. I'm a DM away. I'm a DM away.
exactly. Yeah. However, even as a kid, um, I'm glad that you're open to providing that consultation to any students out there. Um, I I really also feel like that there needs to be some more of a organized structure, and some sort of a medium, some sort of a space that students can go to get guidance while they're deciding whether they want to go here, the application process, and then support throughout their educational career. It's something that we as a community, I feel like, really need to think about seriously, and not just about journalism, not just about film, literally every single area out there. Um, there needs to be a more, rather than being a reactive community that only addresses problems, 10 years after they've already occurred, being a little bit of proactive in that and anticipating challenges and the needs that we have. That would be really awesome. But I'll take you back to the point you were making about the challenges that you faced as you left university, particularly when it came to the Israel-Palestine issue.
Yeah, I still completed my bachelor's in journalism because I had to. I was like, I did not fight my parents for this for 2 years to not complete my bachelor's in
Yeah, there you
journalism.
go.
There's no way I'm not completing it. But it was, for me, one of the main reasons why I left journalism was it was one, because I felt like it wasn't a space for me, but two, I also felt like I had no choice.
Mhm.
It was during my second year of university. I was heavily involved in, I was not just involved in journalism. I was most involved outside of it. I was involved in student groups, charity organizations, the MSA. I was involved in the student union. It was very important for me to be in organizing positions. And during my time at TMU, I was working. I was the president of a program called the Orphan Sponsorship Program, which was um, it was an incredible program. The organizers the year before me were basically like raising $90,000 a month for orphans all around the world, and it was one of the only initiatives that was spearheaded by the MSA, but it wasn't part of the MSA. It was the only organization that was really involving every single student group, ethnicity, race, religion on campus to ensure that we're reaching this goal. So it was an incredible organization, mashallah, and I was very humbled to be the president at that time to spearhead that. However, I think during that time, there was a lot of drama on campus about there was a clause to have a Holocaust Education Week by the Hillel and Jewish students on campus. It was essentially a Holocaust Education Week that had nothing to do with Israel or Palestine. At the time, it was just really a week that they wanted to educate people about what happened at the Holocaust, which is very important information for students to know. And if a community wants to highlight that sort of information, they should. And there were a couple of Muslim students who, I think, unfortunate to their own ignorance, they had spoken against it. And because they had spoken against it, it was ended up being also a bunch of just Muslim students across campus that were just being barred as being supporting this. So for me, I was at that meeting. I had left, and basically there was a planned walkout. Or actually, it wasn't a planned walkout for that. There's so much drama. There's so much drama revolving this. It wasn't a planned walkout for that. I think there was a planned walkout for someone to get impeached or something on the student union. I walked out at 9. The planned walkout was at 11 p.m. I had a curfew to go to, and I was hungry, so I left early. But people did believe that I also was part of the walkout since I was a Muslim, and there was
Wow.
basically Muslims who were also doing that. That was later on proved as well that did not none of that was happening. Essentially, that was the drama that was on campus, and because of that, then there were students who essentially sent names for anybody who was pro-Palestinian, anybody who was on that MSA. It ended up becoming a very anti-Semitic and a Islamophobic issue. where they had taken a bunch of Muslim student leaders' names, and they had submitted it to a organization called Canary Mission. And the Canary Mission essentially is an organization, if you look it up, if anybody says anything like they're Free Palestine, I think even Zayn Malik is on there. But anybody who says free Palestine, anybody who is on the MSA, they correlate them to a terrorist organization. They think the MSA is a terrorist organization. And they go into a deep dive into your Facebook, your Twitter, your Instagram, anything that they can find that you have said anything remotely pro-Palestinian. They will go ahead and post it up and put it online, and then they'll go do their due diligence and send it to your employers. They'll send it to your school. They'll do all of this. It's a very smear campaign sort of organization, which has been barred by the Jewish community as well as not an accurate organization and not factual either, because it is very Islamophobic with their approach. So I ended up being on the Canary Mission. And people did end up going through my tweets from when I was 13 and 14 during the Gaza war that was taking place during that time. And again, I should have not been on the internet at all. This is probably, again, a middle child thing that my parents were not looking after me. I was on the internet. However, I didn't say anything. Alhamdulillah, I will say and look back at that when I was a 13, 14-year-old. I didn't say anything anti-Semitic. Everything that I ever did actually say was very anti-Israel and anti-Israel government. And I think I will always stand by that. I will not take that away from what I was saying, especially during the time of that Gaza war that was taking place during those years. And that ended up being surfaced. That was sent into my school. That was sent in to multiple different employers that I would have potentially gone into. And it's one of the first things, some articles picked it up as well. I was genuinely being followed by other journalists in my classroom, as outside of the classroom, real journalists looking for me to talk about this, because my position as the president of OSP was also essentially the main issue. I think I was in the limelight for that. So they were kind of like, how can someone who has these anti-Semitic views be spearheading this organization? So when you looked up my name, and I think it will maybe still show up if you look up my name. I'm not encouraging anybody to do it, but those are the articles and the information that was showing up on the internet. And I think as a journalist, your main thing is your reputation. And because, again, people, my peers, literally my classmates, my professors, the chair of journalism, was getting constant emails about me, where I am, where my whereabouts are, because journalists want to write about this. It was a very traumatic the situation overall, because it got even worse to sort of the articles that they tried to write, because they tried to write about I've never been very specifically racially profiled like this, but because I'm Afghan and Pakistani and I'm Pashtun, they also tried to relate my ethnicity to specific terrorist groups in Pakistan and Afghanistan.
Oh my God, that's absolutely insane. So not only is it vigilante style policing, it's slander.
Absolutely.
Right?
It was
because you part of that walkout, it's a complete smear campaign. And the fact that it is actually effective is what's mind-blowing to me.
Well, it shouldn't have been. It definitely shouldn't have been. I think it was like the first couple of years of Canary Mission as well, I guess. And I think people just didn't know if it was like, it was very obvious that it wasn't a real, because in their profile, in their like mission statement, like anybody who's part of the MSA is being told that they're part of like a terrorist organization, which is absolutely Islamophobic and
insane.
inaccurate.
Yeah. And it actually had enough effectiveness to basically derail your journalism career.
Absolutely. Yeah, it did. And it wasn't so much the Canary Mission as much as it was that other news organizations picked it up. Mm-hmm. Other like students who were like the campus news picked it up. So it was just like, essentially, it just wasn't a good look. And when I started applying, I was asked by again, it was a suggestion, but it was still like a suggestion that I didn't appreciate. I still don't appreciate at the time. Looking back, I was in second year and the chair of journalism, recommending that I leave my program. As opposed to protecting me instead.
See, that's ridiculous.
I was just kind of like, when I look back at it, I was like, I was a kid. I should have been protected. I should have been like I was obviously not doing anything. It was very obvious that I wasn't doing anything with malicious intent. I had no sort of like, even what was being read and what was being posted from the tweets when I was 13 years old or 14 years old, it wasn't inaccurate information. It was just me having a debate online with someone about the situation. So
Right.
I wish I was, as a kid, I was protected. Looking back, like I still do think I was like 20 years old, 19, 20 years old. So I was a child. However, looking back at it, I think if that didn't happen, I don't think MIFF would have happened. I don't think I would ever have gotten into film. And that was alhamdulillah for me. It ended up working out. But I think for anybody else, I mean, I was like 9 years old and I was dreaming of being a journalist. So it was a huge chunk of me giving up on my dreams. However, I think I was meant to be a filmmaker. I was meant to be able to start MIFF. So alhamdulillah, regardless. But I think looking back at it, I think it was not, and it's not, I'm looking back at this, knowing that this was like in 2015, 2016, 2017, is interesting because I see journalists dealing with this exact sort of discrimination now till this
Right.
day, not just in classrooms, but in newsrooms. So it goes to show that this didn't start on October 7th. This has always been there. It did not start there. It has always been there. And that discrimination has been a huge, especially the situation between Palestine and Israel, has been a huge disconnect from the journalism world as opposed to the reality of it all.
Yeah. No, and I'm really impressed that you're able to have that positive outlook and you're able to look at that incident and say, okay, so much good came out of it. And it feels like one of those examples of Allah plans and they plan. And indeed, Allah is the best of planners. And
Absolutely.
alhamdulillah, I feel like that's so cool that you're able to be there. I'm curious, we were just a moment ago talking about how students may need guidance as they're going through these difficult phases of their lives. You are a 20-year-old who's going through this smear campaign and potentially your educational career is about to be derailed and potentially career as well. Did you feel like you had any support or how isolating was that in that moment?
So I think my situation was worse than I've like led it to believe because I don't want to trauma them too. But I think for me it was lonely because I was being attacked to the point that if anybody even commented on my Facebook post, they were getting DMs about me, asking where I am, if they could speak to me, they want to write an article about me. So I had genuinely like isolated myself because I didn't want any of my friends, especially friends who were in journalism school, to be targeted or attacked this way. So for me, it was very isolating. Again, I couldn't tell my family either because I didn't want them to give me another excuse to not be in journalism school. However, I did have like a good support system. I had friends who obviously believed in me and didn't know that I would never ever like do anything like this, the way people are portraying it to be. I did get the opportunity from the Muslim, like I don't remember who it was, and this is unfortunate that I don't remember, but it was someone from the Muslim community. It was a law firm that had offered to help me out, and I was very grateful for that. Again, for me, again as a kid, as someone who hadn't told my parents, I was like, "There's no way I can go to court or anything about this without my parents finding out." So I decided to stay quiet.
You probably could have.
I could
You
have.
probably could have, and you probably would have
have
won with everything that's happened.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I could have. I was just like very terrified of the whole thing. And for me, I was like, it's better if like we just like stay quiet and like that's what that's the advice that I got from people as well in higher up positions at the university, which I didn't agree with. I was told never. So one of the reasons why things calmed down is, again, I'm grateful for my experience in journalism. It taught me how to kind of do my own PR. So I wrote a statement apologizing. I apologized for upsetting a community, but however, I still stood on what I was saying. I was like, this is the whole situation. This is why this has happened. And I just like gave them my piece. And because I was able to do that, I was told multiple times not to do that. Again, this is like looking back at it, alhamdulillah, for knowing how to do it. But all my friends were also like, just stay quiet, stay quiet, stay quiet. It'll go away. It's just like 15 seconds. It'll go away. But I just didn't feel right for me. Like personally, I was like, for me, I'm very much, even till this day, it's very important for me to be a safe space for everybody. No matter what. And I could see that was being compromised. So I wrote my statement. I published it. And actually, once I wrote that statement, Canary Mission ended up finding it, and they emailed me saying that because you wrote this statement and because you apologize, we'll take your profile down. And they did take my profile down.
Why, thank you very much.
I was like, sure. Yeah.
Too little, too late. Thank you very much. Yeah.
No, there was no thank you. I didn't even care, but I was like, it came down. But I mean, it just goes to show that like, and multiple people actually on campus from the Jewish community also reached out to me, and they were like, they also reached out to their rabbis and they reached out to their communities, like essentially advocating for me, saying that this was a smear campaign. This is not fair. She is not whatever she wrote seems very sincere. It is not fair to what she did. And I think that was what was most important to me, not the fact that Canary Mission took things down. I think my peers who were in journalism school, who were Jewish, who understood that this is not me and I wasn't trying to be anti-Semitic or anything like that. That was what was most important to me, and that's what came out of it.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So
really
I think that's, again, I did that on my own. Unfortunately, I didn't speak to a PR company or anything like that. It was just something that was in me that was kept telling me, like, I need to speak I need to say my piece.
Right, but you basically got away with doing it on your own because you had that journalism training, you had some concept of how to manage a media crisis, right? The vast majority of people that may go through a smear campaign like that would be myself, village idiots who have no idea how to manage any of that, and things would go badly. Yeah,
absolutely. I wouldn't recommend anybody else to do that either. And again, I've been into multiple PR campaigns after this. It's unfortunate. It comes with the territory when you're a Muslim woman in the public space, advocating against Islamophobia. It just comes with the territory.
Exactly.
I've been, and alhamdulillah, I've learned from that, and being able to I think for me, it's about the way you say things when it comes to PR, and it's about very much being very transparent and honest with what you're saying. And I think that's the approach I took. I didn't take it as oh, how do I do this and for a media PR kind of thing. I genuinely just I took it as me writing a statement in the sense that how can I again create a safe space for someone, and I can't do that without being honest and transparent. And if I did make a mistake, I should take accountability. And I did take accountability for what I think, but I also recognized I was 13 years old. I was 14 years old. I apologize for what I did as a kid, but I think we should also come to the point that I was a child. I was a child that shouldn't have been on the internet. I was genuinely on the internet to get a follow from the Jonas Brothers and One Direction, and I somehow got into, and I somehow got involved in the whole Israel-Gaza war, and the whole conversation of it all. However, even then, looking back at it, I also wanted to recognize that I did not. As a kid, even then, especially as a kid who had just come from Pakistan, I also recognized that too, and there are some sort of anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic statements that come from the territory there as well. And despite that, I was still very much firm on my beliefs as a Muslim, where I wasn't being anti-Semitic. I was just really recognizing the oppression that existed from a government, and a government is not a religious entity.
Exactly. I think at the end of all of this, the most important question that I have is, eventually, at any point, did you get that follow from the Jonas Brothers?
No. But I did go to their concert last year. I went to their concert last year, so that was great.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so I'm having such an amazing time talking to you that I sort of completely forgot that I had all these questions about MIFF. So at some point in time, I feel like I should ask you questions about MIFF as well. Just, I guess, introduce the concept of the Muslim International Film Festival.
Yeah, of course. Okay. So after my little journey of stepping away from journalism, I decided to go into documentary journalism, and more so independent documentary journalism. And that was because I felt like you would have more control over the story. And so I applied to be a production assistant for a documentary film called The Secret Marathon. And The Secret Marathon is essentially a documentary film about Afghan women running their first marathon in Afghanistan. And it was a kind of incredible story that I was a part of. And because I was able to, the film was doing really well, and it was going across multiple film festivals across the country. So I was, traveling to Edmonton, I was traveling to Calgary, Sudbury, and then I landed in a small film festival called the Zonta Film Festival in Waterloo or Windsor. Waterloo. It was in Waterloo. And so my friend and my co-founder and a big group of my friends decided to go with me because they had still not watched the film yet. And we decided to drive to Waterloo. And at that film festival, the Zonta Film Festival is essentially a film festival for female directors and female filmmakers. And in my whole time at this, before even the Zonta Film Festival, every film festival that I went to, I realized that I was the only Muslim in the room.
Mhm.
I realized that I was
Right.
the only Afghan woman, only like Pakistani woman, only like usually sometimes even the only person of color, even the only person of color in the room, right? So I realized how dense the space was and how much the space didn't feel like it was for me. And I kind of got tired of, like laughing at, white people jokes that weren't funny and doing my customer service voice. So I was just kind of like, um, it would have been, and I've thought about this after walking out of one of the film festivals in Calgary. I was like, it would be really cool if I could start a space for Muslim filmmakers, called the Muslim International Film Festival. And on my drive back from Waterloo with my co-founder Obaid, I was telling him about it. I've been really thinking about it. That like it would be really cool. Like we just went to the Zonta Film Festival. There's a Toronto International Film Festival. It'd be really cool if there's something like the Muslim International Film Festival. And he was like, he just like kind of like froze while he was driving, and he was like, "Wait, like that's really cool. Does it not exist? Are you sure it doesn't exist?" I was like, "I don't know, actually. I never checked." And we went through a Google search, and I was like, "No, it doesn't exist." And he was like, "Make the Instagram account right now. Make the Facebook page right now. Go on GoDaddy.com and make the domain right now." He's like, "You have to get on this. Like this is so important," because I think for him it was his first time being at a film festival too, and he was like very amazed to see that there was a space for female filmmakers, but he knew how important it was for Muslims as well. And Obaid really just, I wasn't going to do it for another year or two. Obaid really just pushed me. He's like, "No, you have to do this now." He's like, "Before anybody else gets onto it, this is something that you're very passionate about. You should do it." And that was like in November of 2019. And then like, I want to say December, we met up at Scarborough Town Center. We spoke about, like, we were like, let's see if people are actually interested in it. So we did a soft launch in January 5th of 2020. And when we did the soft launch on Twitter, it didn't go super viral, but we got a lot of attraction. It went, sort of went viral. Like there's so many Muslim
Amazing.
filmmakers. They were like, "Oh my God, this is so cool. There's a Muslim International Film Festival. We want to be a part of it." And that's when it kind of just reaffirmed it for us all. We were like, "Okay, we want to do
Right.
this." And we went in and we registered ourselves as a nonprofit. We created all the platforms that needed to be created. And alhamdulillah, we started launching when we were hit with the pandemic in March of 2020.
Of course, yeah.
And we felt a little, and at this time, the first year of the pandemic, most festivals had canceled.
Right.
They were not going ahead with their film festival. However, Obaid came up with a very bright idea of doing a drive-in film festival. It's just what we did. Instead of like canceling, we decided to do a
Nice.
drive-in film festival for the first 2 years during the pandemic, at the Ontario Place Drive-In, which ended up creating so much more attraction for everyone else
Yeah.
because they knew something was happening. At that time, there was no events, so it was very, not just for Muslims to come out, but non-Muslims to also show up to be like, "Oh, there's a
Right.
drive-in, let's watch a film." And then yeah, in our third year was our first time actually having an in-person event, and alhamdulillah, every year since the first year, we've been doubling in our attendance, doubling in our social media outreach and engagement, doubling, if not, no, not doubling. We're like quadrupling in our number of submissions, alhamdulillah. And this year,
Wow.
this was the year that we went from a 2-day or 3-day festival to a 5-day festival as well. So alhamdulillah, it's just been really good. I think for Obaid and I, we're very conscious in the decisions we make in terms of like, us as a festival. I think it's very important us to make sure that we're not heading away from our Islamic values either. And it's been very reaffirming for us as to like organizers to know that alhamdulillah, no matter what, there's so much things that go on behind the scenes where you feel like, oh my God, this is not going to work out, but Allah
Right.
always pulls through for us. Like it's
Alhamdulillah.
always like been like that, and that just gives us the reaffirmation that alhamdulillah, we're creating the right space and we're doing the right things for the right reasons.
Amazing. You mentioned that your attendance has been growing. I'm just curious, if you have any numbers, anything that you can share on how many people
Yeah,
roughly
I
attended
can
this.
definitely give you rough numbers, but first year we only had about 80 cars show up. Again, we couldn't tell because of COVID restrictions how many people are in the car. Our second year we had 180 cars, which is incredible. Our
Yeah.
third year, which is our first year, we had I would say 300 to 400 people in attendance physically. The year after that, we sold out to a 500 plus crowd. This year we sold out to our 500 plus crowd for opening night, and then we had multiple other screenings that you were attending as well.
That I attended
Yeah,
as well. Yeah.
yeah. So I think I would say we went from, so in the last couple of years, 2 years as well, it was 500 plus for multiple days, so 2 3 days. So I
Yeah.
feel like in the last 3 years we kind of went from like a 600 to 800 to no. 800 to 1200 and close to an 1800 audience this year for the 5 days, across all 5 days.
That's awesome. So
Yeah.
one of the reasons that I asked that question is because I am genuinely embarrassed that I did not know about the existence of MIFF until this year, and I'd love to figure out a way of blaming you for it, but
Yeah,
I can't. Really?
I mean, honestly,
How is it possible that I don't know yet?
I will say, because I don't blame people when they don't know about it. I think especially if you're not in the film industry. If you're not in the film industry, it's kind of hard to know about it because I will say we are also like low budgeted, so we don't spend as much money as we should in our marketing. So I've been fully transparent with that. When people don't know what MIFF is, I'm like, yeah, it's because I did not pay for that ad. I did not pay for that ad
Exactly.
to get in front of you. So it's totally fine. But
Okay, all right. Well, that makes me feel a
now.
little bit better. I feel a little bit better about that. The other thing that you mentioned is that your number of submissions have been increasing.
Oh yeah, by a lot.
That's awesome for me. What is your process of curating what films to showcase at MIFF? Is there a specific criteria?
So there is a rubric. So what we do is we have a selection committee that goes through all the films, which is essentially members of the team who are part of the film acquisition team. They go through the films because we do now get a lot of film submissions. I think our watch time this year was 116 hours to actually go through all of those films. Our submissions had increased by 140%. So it was a huge jump. So we didn't want our judges or our jury to go through all of those hours of films. We quite honestly cannot pay them an honorarium that would be equivalent to that amount of hours. So we had our selection committee go through all the films to just kind of like get the films that are like at the 70%, 80% mark. Everybody gets a rubric. A rubric follows through the criteria of just everything filmmaking in terms of like production, costume, acting, performance, everything. And then we also have an additional category that is different that you'll see from any other film festival is Muslim excellence. And our Muslim excellence category is essentially not just like sort of any sort of message that comes from, I guess, an Islamic perspective, but it's also the value of, let's say, if there was a actor or a filmmaker or production. If, for example, I will say the winner of our Muslim Excellence Award this year was Glassworker. Was the Glassworker, and I think one of the main reasons for that, again, is the fact that it is a Muslim filmmaker, an entirely Muslim team, voiceovers, everything embodies excellence, and that's what we consider Muslim excellence as well. It doesn't have to be the messaging all the time. It could also just be the process of it, the success of it. The messaging behind it is also a huge thing, but I think it's good to we like to make sure that it's overall embodying like sort of the idea of Muslim excellence, and that doesn't just happen to be an Islamic message. It could also just be Muslim performance, because as an organization overall, I think it's important to know that when it comes to getting a job in the filmmaking world, writing and story building is only one aspect of it. In order to infiltrate more Muslims in these positions, they have to be in multiple positions. They have to be producers, they have to be executive producers, they have to be being decision makers. So it's important for us to embody all of those positions as opposed to just the story when it comes to our Muslim Excellence Award and that category overall.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. And I feel like MIFF has done a pretty good job of establishing itself as a platform for underrepresented voices. How important do you think is it for films themselves to reflect the diverse identities and experiences of their creators or even their audiences?
It's very important, but I think there's also something that as Muslim filmmakers and even just filmmakers in Canada, I will say Canadian filmmakers need to recognize that it's important to have diverse voices and marginalized communities represented on screen. However, it's more important to do them correctly. A lot of the times I feel like if you look on Canadian television, Canadian film, there's a lot of times where certain characters are added from different communities just to fill a diversity quota, and there's no depth. There's no depth to the actual character.
Okay. Yeah, that token Indian guy.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
And I think it's important for us, and I see this across Canadian Muslim filmmakers as well as the submissions that we get too, is that they do try to fill that diversity quota within their own film making and story writing as well. That I think it's important to have those stories be told, but that's why it's important for those stories to be told by those diverse communities themselves, because they will be able to add the depth in those characters as opposed to, like, let's say, for example, for me, if I was writing a story and I decide to just add a token, an experience of a token Black Muslima or a Black hijabi Muslima in my story, just because I think it's important to add in there. I don't like as a Afghan woman, I don't know the experiences to the depth that I would know for a Black Muslim woman. So it's important to have that character in there, but I should bring in a Black Muslim woman to write that sort of story and that aspect of the story in, as opposed to try to write it to fill that diversity quota in. I think it's very important to do that. And I never would have said this a couple of years ago, but through my years of seeing all the films that come in through MIFF, but then also seeing all the film and all the TV shows that we see on Canadian television, being on the different side of like pitching as well. I think it's important for us to recognize that. Like it's important to have diversity is important, but it's important for it to be authentic. It's important for it to be real and not just come out just to fill a quota.
No, that's amazing. And it's so, and as far as I know, and based on my very limited knowledge, from what I understand, the one community that I know of that has probably put in the most effort when it comes to representation is the African American, the Black community.
Yes, absolutely.
And it has been as a result of a lot of hard work and a lot of advocacy as well. I'm really wondering, from your experience being within that world, do you think it's possible for Muslims or Muslim filmmakers rather to address issues of underrepresentation without advocacy or other broader strategies? Just making films with Muslim representation or making films for festivals like MIFF, would that be enough? Or do we need a broader strategy to try and break that trend?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I as someone who is like given my blood, sweat, and tears for MIFF, I know that MIFF is not enough. I know it's not enough for us to be able to get to that goal. It's why actually in the last 3 years, we went from our mission statement completely changed from just being a film festival that celebrates Muslim excellence in film, but we are also now an advocacy group in the Canadian film sector, to film and TV sector, to be able to advocate for Muslims in the space, especially in the last year, given the last year and a half, given what's going on between Israel and Palestine and the constant anti-Palestinian narratives that exist in the industry. So it's very important to be in advocacy situations. Again, I think this is like what people don't recognize outside of the Muslim community, that when you are a Muslim creative in these industries, unfortunately, you have to be an advocate as well, and kind of put on that advocacy role. So it's very important for people to know that yes, you can create a film for Muslims, for Muslim communities. However, it's important to also create those films that are digestible. And I'm not saying to water it down. I'm not saying to whitewash your stories, but I'm saying just to make sure that you're prioritizing to get those stories in those spaces as opposed to just our spaces, because we already know our own stories. We already know what we're talking about.
Sticking with filmmaking, it's something that I noticed a little bit when I attended that event at MIFF in November, something like that. Yeah. Which, by the way, was an amazing event. I came with a family. We had a wonderful time. We saw the screening of short films. We saw, like, I want to say 5 or 7 short films were a part of that screening. What I did notice, and I think this is something that you sort of mentioned to me as well, that a lot of the films that are coming out, that are being shown at MIFF or that our filmmakers are making, are somehow related to our experience of shared trauma.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that we are dealing with as a community, individually, internationally, between Gaza and Kashmir and Uyghurs, and that's a big part of our identity in 2024, or heck, for the last 100 years or something. So that is coming out, that is being reflected quite a bit. In your opinion, and I'm sure I have my own as well, but is it a response to more external expectations, or more of a personal experiences thing, or something else entirely?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of layers to this. There's definitely a couple of layers to this. When we look at major film festivals like Cannes, as well as like just the stories that get the most publicity around the world, unfortunately, even on the media, like when we're talking about journalism, the stories that go viral in journalism are the trauma-filled, sad stories, unfortunately. So there's a couple of layers to this, where it's the fact that film festivals overall, like every film festival that you go to, not just MIFF, majority of the themes are depressing. They are real. They are sad. They are about like real situations. It's depending on the theme of what's happening that year. So, for example, I think even the year where there was a Syrian refugee crisis, we saw a lot of films regarding refugee crises and displacement. So it's definitely about what is, unfortunately, when it comes to film festivals, what is trending. When it comes to the Muslim community, and I think we talked about this just a little bit earlier about how you said that a lot of advocacy does come from the Black community. And this year, our theme for MIFF was Muslim joy as activism, which was inspired by, and again, I encourage everybody to go to look this like sort of report up. It's on the Black Screen Office's website. It's called Being Seen. It's a whole report, and it's about in the 60s, 70s, or 80s. I'm not sure which era, but at that time, it was very much every time representation that you saw on the screen when it came to the Black community, it had something to do with slavery. It had something to do with trauma, and
Right.
the Black community was pretty much, obviously, of course, sick of it. And what they did is essentially they did a call out and a call in, where they called into their own community because they were so accustomed, and so are we, to seeing our own traumas on screen. That's what we write best. That's what we write more of.
Right.
And we think that that is what is going to be getting accepted because that's what they want to see. So we end up writing those stories ourselves. And I've been doing this for the last 3 years myself, 4 years myself of writing, until just this year where I decided to kind of like give myself a different sort of perspective. But they did the call into their own community and then a call out to the executives in those positions that are accepting these films that you can't just only accept trauma. That's not
Right.
who we are. We're a community of multiple different stories, multiple different dynamics. And I think that's when we started seeing like, stories like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. You started seeing like things on screen like My Wife and Kids that were centering, Black community members in different positions as opposed to just those trauma sort of focused stories. And that is why this year, even you weren't able to make it to our panel, but inshallah, I hope to see you there next year during one of our industry events. That was a discussion of our panel where it was about Muslim joy as activism, our overall theme. Although that wasn't reflective, unfortunately, all the films that we
Right.
did get, maybe one or two of them were like on the happier side or not so depressing side. We did that deliberately, and I know a lot of people were confused because they're like, "Oh, your theme this year was Muslim joy as activism, but all the films are so depressing." And I was like, "There's a reason for that because I think the main reason is that to show that contrast that we want to, like as filmmakers, I think as Muslim filmmakers, I think we should start writing more happier stories. Like it's a call into our own community to come in. Let's write more happier stories. Let's write that comedy. Let's write that sort of like moment of happiness that we've and it's worth seeing. It's worth seeing on screen. It's worth being accepted. It's worth getting funding for. And a call out to overall communities that are not from the Muslim community to know that we're noticing what's going on. We notice that you only like to see our trauma on screen, and we're actively as a community working against that now.
Right. So what role do you think genres like comedy or action or romance can play in reshaping those perceptions of Muslims in the media, the changes that you're trying to bring about?
So this is going to be me going on a bit of a tangent, but I think this example is important. But when I compare my community, like for example, the Afghan community and the Pakistani community to the Indian community, like even though we're all sharing borders, if you look at it, India Bollywood is heavily built on romance,
Yes.
built on romance.
Probably
And
a little too
so,
much.
yeah, a little too much, but it's heavily built on romance, and that's why I think it's so okay to see. I would say you see, it's very common to see Indian elderly couples and even younger couples to be able to express themselves in love in their community, to express that sort of love, express that sort of romance publicly, or even in front of their kids or in front of their children. But when we're talking about Pakistani dramas, it is a lot about, the drama between the in-laws, the dramas between a husband and a wife. In Afghanistan, we never see sort of romance on screen at all. So then when it comes to our parents showcasing that romance, they're also not open to doing that. So I think it's just an overall psychological effect when it comes to romance and comedy
Yeah.
or even trauma, is that if you see a lot of it on screen and if it's acceptable, then it'll be reflective in your life as well. Right now, I think in the Afghan community to be able to speak about that, but even in the Pakistani community, sometimes it's a shame to be showing being romantic towards your wife in front of your children or in front of anybody else. Whereas that's not the case in societies where it is acceptable. I think it's just normalizing. I think it's a whole aspect of normalizing it. And I think we as a community need to normalize it. And it doesn't have to be romance. It doesn't have to be romance. It could be happiness. We just need to normalize our own happiness.
Right.
And
And honestly, I don't even know if a romance in and of itself is a problem. The challenge comes is when you start talking about romance, then boundaries start getting pushed, and you have inappropriate stuff developed that goes outside of of your own your value system, and that risk always needs to be managed and monitored quite diligently. Do you think exploring some of those lighthearted or diverse genres could possibly open new doors for Muslim filmmakers? And I'm not talking about effects on the community, but just in terms of funding, distribution, or even audience reach.
I think so. Absolutely. I think once people are more accustomed and normalized to seeing our happiness and our comedy on screen, they'll be more inclined to actually like fund it. And I think, for example, like I want to talk about like even more recent sort of shows that have come out. Like for example, Mo, which is a film on is a TV show on Netflix by a Palestinian filmmaker. And Mo Amer, yeah, exactly. And then there's also Man Like Mubin. There's Man Like Mubin from the UK.
Yep, I saw,
There's Rami, and they're using elements of like comedy in order to tell stories that are important. And I think I've always been a fan of that, not just because I think I'm funny as hell, but also because I think it's just really important to be able to tell your stories in a lighthearted and comedic way in order to touch the right strings. And I think we haven't seen that from our community because it's always been, I mean, you saw in the short films, it's always been kind of like hard hitting. Sit there with your emotions, cry. This is the reality of it. And of course, it's the reality of it. And I don't ever want to take it away from that. But it's also important to know that the reality of it all is also laughter. Like we still laugh at the end of the day. We still make our jokes. And I think once there has been kind of like a set standard of normalizing that sort of like those sort of stories, the community, like let's say, like for example, talk in a completely technical term, is that let's say we see more comedy on Canadian television of Muslim that surrounds Muslim stories. For example, Little Mosque on the Prairie, we see more stories like Little Mosque on the Prairie on screen.
Well, how great was that?
Yeah, exactly. And then once we see we see those sort of aspects of it, and then we see once they can see that this is performing well and people there are enough viewers that are watching this, then they can also see that, okay, we're making money off of this. Again, it is business, right? They have to see as well.
Right.
So once they see that, and once they see that people are actually eating, loving all of this sort of content, then we can also make our case and be like, this show performed really well. This is another aspect of it. This is what we want to do. And that way we can see more screens, we'll get more funding and all of that.
Okay. So one final question. I promise no more for you. So just as heck, the theme of this entire show is you tell me. So what advice would you give filmmakers who want to take their first step into filmmaking specifically?
First and foremost, independent filmmaking is not easy. It's not a money-making business. It's not a pursuit of, there is definitely a chance of, getting that sort of like blockbuster film. There's a chance of getting that sort of fame. There's multiple opportunities of being on red carpets. However, it's very important to know that it's not a lot of the filmmakers that are in the space right now. Of course, making money and having a stable job is their commitment. However, it's not a goal to be able to be made. It shouldn't be a goal to be making this much money. I think your passion will eventually lead you to that. So let's get that out of the way first. Nobody in the film industry right now who is a Muslim. There are some people, but not everyone is making loads of money. 1, 2, I would say I think always be, when it comes to telling their story, I think it's important to learn the right skills. I think there are times where we get opportunities as Muslim filmmakers because, again, we're tokenized. It's in some spaces, and it's great. Always take the opportunity to be tokenized if that means that you get your project funded. But if you feel like you're not ready for that, and I think that's something that I've learned myself as well. Unfortunately, because there's not that many Muslims in the space. Each role that we do get does kind of come with an amana with the Muslim community. It comes with the amana of telling the story right. It comes with the amana of like representing our community in the right way, because there's so little representation, that one sort of representation that they will see is going to be reflective of the community. So it's important to have, there are organizations out there that are consulting, like there are Muslims who are consulting these stories. Speak to your consultants. Make sure you get the best of the best people on your team. You don't want to have a great story and then not being portrayed right because you don't have the right production team. You don't have the right cameraman. Every aspect of your story, try your best to get it to the best, like the best of the best that you can be, because you deserve the best of it can be, but so does your community. I think it's very important to always center that. I think it's also one thing that me and a good friend of mine, Yasmin Kanji, who is one of the consulting agencies that I was speaking about, she runs Films with a Cause, which is a consulting agency that works with BIPOC communities on set to be able to make sure that stories are being told accurately. Something that her and I have talked about quite a lot, and she was on my panel as well, is about when you're taking, because we come from a community, especially because as Canadian Muslim filmmakers, a majority of us are first generation immigrants. We do, sometimes more often than not, we do come from areas of trauma, whether that's escaping our country, whether that's being an immigrant child, whether that's bullying in school. We come from a lot of areas of trauma. However, yes, the trauma is important to talk about. It's not always important to showcase. It's not always important for the first thing for our other people outside of our community to be seeing it. For example, like sometimes we do go through religious trauma. Now, I think it's important to just sit down and kind of think about, is it important for the non-Muslim community to be able to see this? Is this a story just for my community, or is it a story for everybody? I think it's important to kind of do the pros and cons of each story that you do tell, with the idea of that this is an amana, like this is something that God gave me an opportunity to be able to tell a story. Now, what am I doing with this opportunity? Making sure that you're causing more good than damage. Of course, it's important to tell authentic stories and real stories. However, it's also important to be knowing that you're responsible now to be able to tell the story right, and responsible for the sort of backlash or feedback that you're going to get it from the wider community. That's the main thing that I would give, because I think we're starting to now see more Muslim stories on screen. We're starting to see now more Muslim stories, Muslims advocate for their rights to be told, stories to be told. However, that still comes with a major responsibility. It's not always just about, this is my story, this is what I want to say, this is what I want to be told. Right. Telling. I think it's about what it's going to be portrayed and how it's going to be portrayed is what is important as well.
That is wonderful put. Thank you so much. Jazakallah khair, Hirra. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible journey and insights with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure learning about your work with MIFF, your thoughts on the film industry, your passion for storytelling and creating opportunities for underrepresented voices. Honestly, it's truly inspiring. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, so, and to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. Inshallah, we hope that you do when that time comes around. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do not forget to share it with your family and friends. We'd also love to hear from you, hear your thoughts. Drop us a comment or send us a message with your feedback. Oh Allah, we thank you for allowing us to come together in this meaningful conversation. Forgive us for any shortcomings and accept from us the good that we have shared. Strengthen our faith and grant us the ability to act on what we have learned and what we have spoken about. Oh Allah, accept this effort from us and make it a means of goodness. Keep us steadfast on the straight path and unite our hearts in love and understanding. Ameen. Until next time, this is Khurram Rashid reminding you to stay curious, stay connected, and stay inspired. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.